The bent metal rod was still in my hand when I heard her voice behind me. "What do you think you're doing?" "Evelyn." I froze. My mother stood in the doorway of my bedroom, her face pale with rage, her hands trembling. In my other hand was the lipstick. Rose Dawn. The $45 lipstick that would cost me everything. For one heartbeat, I thought about lying. About saying I was just looking at it, just holding it, just admiring it from afar like I was supposed to. But the pink stain on my lips betrayed me. The evidence was written across my face in a shade that was never meant for girls like me. Eleanor's eyes dropped to the metal rod in my grip, the garden stake my father used for his precious roses, and I watched something shift in her expression. Something cold and calculating that made my blood run ice cold. "Give me that," she said quietly. Too quietly. I should have run. I should have dropped everything and bolted for the door. But I was 16 and stupid, and still believed that if I just explained, if I just apologized hard enough, I could make her understand. I could make her love me. I was wrong. What happened in the next 5 minutes would leave me limping for the rest of my life. What my mother did to me that night would teach me that monsters don't always hide under beds. Sometimes they tuck you in. Sometimes they make you breakfast. Sometimes they smile at the neighbors and organize charity drives and everyone thinks they're perfect. And sometimes, when you take something that doesn't belong to you, they make sure you never forget it. If you've ever wondered what it takes to break free from the people who were supposed to love you, if you've ever questioned whether survival is worth the scars it leaves behind, then stay with me. This story gets darker before it gets lighter. This story has blood and broken bones, and a justice that came 6 years too late. But I promise you, there's a reason I'm still standing here today. And it's not the reason you think. If this resonates with you, please like this video. Subscribe for more stories of survival and strength. And comment below with your own experiences. Your voice matters. And you need to hear this. Because what I'm about to tell you might save your life. Now let me take you back to the beginning. To the moment everything shattered. To the night I learned that family can be the cruelest teacher of all. I was 16 when my mother broke me. Not metaphorically. Literally broke something inside me that never quite healed the same way. It started with a lipstick. Marlene's lipstick. To be exact. My older sister. The golden child. The one who could do no wrong in Eleanor's eyes. I had borrowed it. Just for a moment. Just to see what I might look like if I was visible. If I mattered. I stood in front of my bedroom mirror. My hand trembling as I applied the soft pink color to my lips. And for just 1 second, I looked like someone worth noticing. The shade was called Rose Dawn. I remember that detail because I stared at the bottom of the tube for what felt like hours afterward, lying on my bedroom floor, trying to understand how something so innocent could cost so much. Rose Dawn, like a promise of new beginnings, that never came. That was when Eleanor burst through my door. She didn't knock. She never knocked on my door. Not like she did with Marlene's. My room was an extension of her domain. A space I occupied, but never truly owned. The door slammed against the wall so hard that a crack appeared in the plaster. A crack that would still be there months later when I finally left. A permanent scar on the wall to match the one on my leg. I have replayed that moment 1,000 times in my head, wondering what would have happened if I had just put the lipstick back. If I had been faster, more careful, invisible, like I was supposed to be. But there is no rewriting history, only surviving it. Eleanor's face twisted into something I had seen before, but never quite this sharp. This focused. Her voice was ice over broken glass. "What is this? Evelyn, you little thief." I tried to explain. The words tumbled out of my mouth in a desperate rush. Apologies and excuses and promises that I would never touch anything that wasn't mine again. I told her I was just trying it on, that I wasn't going to keep it, that I would wash it off right away. My voice got higher and higher, more frantic, until I was almost shrieking my innocence to someone who had already decided I was guilty. But Eleanor wasn't listening. She never listened when it came to me. "You think you can steal what belongs to her to become her," the word dripped with such venom that I physically recoiled. Her? Always her. Never me. Never worthy of a name when she was angry. Just pronouns that cut like weapons. She took a step closer, and I could see her hands shaking. Not from fear or sadness, but from rage barely contained, her perfectly manicured nails were digging into her palms, leaving little crescent moons in her skin. Her jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscles jumping beneath her foundation. "Do you know how much that lipstick cost?" she hissed. $45. $45 that I spent on your sister because she deserves beautiful things. And you? You ungrateful little parasite. You think you can just take it." I wanted to point out that $45 was less than what she spent on her morning coffee in a week. I wanted to say that I wasn't trying to steal it. Just borrow it. I wanted to scream that maybe if she had ever bought me anything nice, I wouldn't have needed to borrow Marlene's things. But I said nothing, because I had learned, over 16 years of living in this house, that my words only made things worse. She crossed the room to my dresser and opened the bottom drawer where my father, Richard, kept his garden tools. We had a shed outside, but Richard liked to keep his favorite tools close, in the house where he could access them easily for his prized rose garden. The irony of roses wasn't lost on me. Even then, Rose Dawn lipstick, rose garden tools, rose-colored glasses that the whole neighborhood wore when they looked at our perfect family. I watched in horror as she pulled out the metal rod he used for staking plants. Long and gleaming and suddenly terrifying in her grip. It was about 3 feet long. Solid steel, with a pointed end for pushing into the ground. Richard had special ordered it from some fancy garden supply catalog. He was so proud of that stupid rod. "Give me your leg," she said, her voice devoid of all emotion. It was the flatness of her tone that scared me most. No anger, no passion, just cold, calculated intention. The room seemed to tilt. I couldn't process what she was saying. Give her my leg like it was something I could just hand over, like it was a thing that could be separated from my body. I backed away, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might crack my ribs. "Mom, please. I'm sorry. I'll never do it again. Please." My back hit the wall. I was trapped between my bed and the window, with nowhere to go, except through her. She advanced slowly, deliberately, like she had all the time in the world. Like this was something she had been planning, had been waiting for an excuse to do. I said, "Give me your leg." Her voice was still flat, still emotionless, and that made it so much worse than if she had been screaming. I shook my head frantically. Tears were already streaming down my face, making the borrowed lipstick run in pink streaks down my chin. "Please. Mom. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." She closed the distance between us in 3 steps. Her hand shot out and gripped my arm with surprising strength, yanking me forward. I lost my balance and stumbled, falling to my knees in front of her. For a brief, hysterical moment, I thought she wanted me to beg, that this was all some twisted lesson about humility and knowing my place. But then she grabbed my ankle and pulled my leg straight, holding it in place with one hand while she raised the metal rod with the other. That was when the first blow landed. The sound was worse than the pain at first. Metal against bone makes a specific sound, a hollow crack that echoes in your skull long after the impact. It sounded like something breaking, which I suppose it was. Not the bone. Not yet. But something inside me that had still believed my mother loved me in some twisted way. Then the pain hit, white and blinding, spreading from my shin up through my entire body like fire in my veins. I screamed. Not a word, not a plea, just a raw sound of agony that came from somewhere deep inside me. The second blow came before I had time to process the first, then the third, each one placed with surgical precision on the same spot, as if she was trying to make a point rather than simply punish. And she was. She was teaching me a lesson about my place in this family. Each impact sent fresh waves of pain through my leg, radiating out until my whole body felt like it was burning. I tried to pull away, but her grip on my ankle was iron strong. I clawed at the carpet, at her hand, at anything I could reach. But nothing made her stop. The metal rod came down again and again, and I lost count after the third blow. Maybe it was 5 times. Maybe it was 10. All I knew was pain and the sound of my own screaming and the feeling of something fundamental breaking inside me. I collapsed on the floor, tears streaming down my face, my leg on fire with agony. I couldn't feel my foot anymore. Everything below my knee was just white noise of pain. So intense it almost felt like nothing at all. Like my body had given up trying to process the information and had just shut down instead. Through the blur of pain and tears, I saw Marlene appear in the doorway. For one disparate moment, I thought she might help me. I might tell our mother to stop, might call someone, do something, anything. Instead, she wrinkled her nose in disgust. "Mom, what are you doing? She's just being annoying as usual." Her voice was so casual, like she had walked in on me, throwing a tantrum instead of being beaten on the floor. Like this was normal. Like I was the problem for making noise about it. Eleanor barely glanced at her favorite daughter. She was breathing hard, her chest heaving with exertion. Strands of her perfectly styled hair had come loose and were sticking to her forehead with sweat. She looked wild, almost unhinged, and it occurred to me that I had never seen her like this before. Eleanor was always controlled, always perfect, always aware of how she appeared to the outside world. But there was no outside world in my bedroom. Just her and me and the metal rod and the pain. She crouched down next to me, so close I could smell her perfume. The same expensive scent she wore to church every Sunday, where everyone thought we were the perfect family. Chanel no. Woo. Another detail seared into my memory by trauma. The smell of it mixed with my sweat and tears, and the copper tang of blood, where I had bitten through my lip trying not to scream. "You will remember this," she whispered directly into my ear, her breath hot against my skin. "Every time you take a step." Then she stood, handed the metal rod to Marlene like it was nothing more than a garden tool, and walked out of my room. Marlene looked down at me with something between pity and contempt, then tossed the rod on the floor next to my head. It landed with a dull thud on the carpet, still warm from Eleanor's grip. "You're pathetic," she said, and followed our mother out, leaving my door wide open so anyone passing by could see me curled on the floor. Sobbing, I lay there for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. The pain was so intense I couldn't think, couldn't move. I couldn't do anything except exist in this bubble of agony. My leg was swelling already. I could feel it, the skin stretching tight and hot. When I finally managed to lift my head and look down, I saw that my shin was already turning purple, a deep bruise spreading like spilled ink across my skin. I tried to stand but couldn't. The pain was too much. Just putting the slightest pressure on my leg sent fresh spikes of agony shooting through my entire body, so I crawled instead, dragging myself across the carpet to my bed, leaving a trail of tears behind me. I pulled myself up onto my mattress and lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to understand what had just happened. My mother had beaten me with a metal rod, for borrowing lipstick, for trying to feel pretty for one single moment, for existing in a way that she found offensive, and Marlene had watched and done nothing. Richard was downstairs, probably in his study, and he had either not heard my screams or had chosen to ignore them. I was alone in this house full of people, more alone than I had ever been in my entire life. That night, I dragged myself out of the house. Every step was agony, my legs screaming with each movement. But I couldn't stay there. I couldn't lie in that room with the door open and the metal rod on the floor like evidence of a crime no one would ever prosecute. Getting down the stairs was a nightmare. I had to sit and scoot down each step on my bottom like a toddler, biting my lip to keep from crying out with each jarring movement. It took me 20 minutes to descend one flight of stairs. 20 minutes of pain and humiliation and the fear that Eleanor would hear me and come back to finish what she started. But the house was quiet. Richard was in his study with the door closed, probably going over his precious financial documents. Eleanor and Marlene were in the living room watching television, their laughter drifting up the stairs like mockery. I could hear the canned laughter of whatever sitcom they were watching, the cheerful sounds of fake family happiness while I crawled past them like a wounded animal. I made it to the back door, pulled myself up using the doorframe, and limped out into the night. The cold air hit my face like a slap, shocking after the stifling heat of pain inside. I stood on our back porch for a moment, swaying slightly, trying to figure out where to go. Not the front yard, where neighbors might see. Not anywhere well lit or public. I needed darkness and privacy, and somewhere I could fall apart without witnesses. I made it to the small park 2 blocks away, the one where mothers pushed their children on swings during the day. It was empty now. Just me, and the shadows and the distant sound of laughter from a neighbor's house. Each step sent fresh agony shooting through my leg. I had to stop every few feet to catch my breath, to let the worst of the pain pass before I could force myself to take another step. By the time I reached the park, I was drenched in sweat despite the cool night air. My whole body was shaking, whether from pain or shock or the cold. I couldn't tell. Maybe all three. I collapsed onto the nearest bench, a cold stone structure that had been donated by some local family whose name was engraved on a plaque. I wondered if they knew that their memorial bench was now being used by a 16-year-old girl who had just been beaten by her mother. I sat there and stared at my leg. Even in the dim light from the distant street lamps, I could see how badly swollen it was. My jeans were tight around my shin, the fabric stretched over the swelling. I was afraid to roll up my pant leg, afraid of what I might see underneath. So I just sat there, taking shallow breaths, trying not to move, trying not to exist too loudly in case the universe decided I needed more punishment. A woman walked past with her daughter, maybe 6 years old, laughing about something. The little girl was skipping, her hand safe in her mother's nod, completely unaware that not all children got to feel that kind of security. The mother was smiling down at her daughter with such obvious love that I felt something crack inside my chest. I watched them until they disappeared around the corner, and something hardened inside me. Not hatred. Not yet. Something colder and more permanent than hatred. Acceptance. Maybe. The understanding that I would never have what that little girl had. That my mother would never look at me the way that woman looked at her daughter. That I was fundamentally unlovable to the people who were supposed to love me most. I whispered to the darkness. You'll remember this too. Mother. It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. To myself more than to her. I would remember. I would carry this night with me for the rest of my life. And someday, somehow, she would understand what she had done. I don't know how long I sat there. Long enough for the cold to seep into my bones. Long enough for my leg to stop screaming and start throbbing with a duller, deeper ache. Long enough for the adrenaline to wear off and leave me feeling hollow and exhausted. Eventually, I forced myself to stand and limp back home. What choice did I have? I was 16 with no money. No friends close enough to take me in. Nowhere else to go. So I went back to the house where I had been hurt. Crawled up the stairs, the same painful way I had come down, and locked myself in my room. I didn't sleep that night. The pain was too much. And every time I closed my eyes, I saw Eleanor's face, felt the impact of the metal rod, heard that terrible cracking sound. I lay in my bed and stared at the ceiling and waited for morning, knowing that somehow I would have to face them again, knowing that nothing would change. Nothing would get better. Nothing would be different except me. The next morning, I limped into the kitchen where Eleanor and Marlene were having breakfast, like nothing had happened. They were discussing Marlene's college applications, laughing about a dress Eleanor had bought for some upcoming event. Normal. Pleasant. Perfect. The kitchen smelled like fresh coffee and the expensive French pastries Eleanor bought from the bakery downtown. Marlene was wearing one of her designer outfits, her hair perfectly styled, her makeup flawless. Eleanor was in her silk robe, the one she wore on lazy Sunday mornings when she wanted to feel luxurious. They both looked up when I entered, and for a brief moment, I saw something flicker across Eleanor's face. Not guilt. Exactly. Maybe unease. Maybe just annoyance that I was disrupting their pleasant morning with my presence. Good morning, Evelyn, she said coolly, as if she hadn't beaten me unconscious less than 12 hours ago. I didn't respond. I couldn't trust my voice not to break. Eleanor glanced at me with mild irritation. If you're going to mope around, at least do it quietly. I tried to tell her that I was hurt, that I needed help, that my leg was so swollen I could barely walk. The words came out in a stammered rush, pointing to my leg, trying to make her see what she had done. She cut me off with a wave of her hand. Then maybe you shouldn't take things that don't belong to you, Marlene added, without looking up from her phone. Stop playing the victim. You always do this. Make mom look bad and then cry for sympathy. I stood there, swaying slightly from the pain and exhaustion, and realized that they genuinely believed this. They had rewritten last night in their heads, turned it into something I had brought on myself, something I deserved. In their version of events, Eleanor was the victim, forced to discipline her difficult daughter. And I was the villain, the thief, the problem child who made their lives harder. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab Marlene's perfect face and make her look at my leg. Really look at what her mother had done. I wanted to call the police. Call child services. Call anyone who might care that a 16-year-old girl had been beaten with a metal rod for borrowing lipstick. But I did none of those things. Because I knew, with the certainty that comes from years of experience, that no one would believe me. Eleanor Reed was a pillar of the community. She volunteered at the church, organized charity events, smiled, and waved at all the neighbors. She was perfect, and I was the troubled daughter, the one who caused problems, the one who wasn't quite right. So I poured myself a glass of water, took it back to my room, and locked the door. When Richard came home from work that evening, he found me sitting at the kitchen table, trying not to cry from the pain. I had been forced to come downstairs because Eleanor had called me down to help with dinner preparation, as if my leg wasn't screaming with every movement. He frowned at my obvious limp as I moved around the kitchen, trying to chop vegetables with hands that shook from pain and exhaustion. What did you do now? Not, are you okay? Not, what happened? Just the automatic assumption that whatever was wrong was my fault. Mom hit me, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I couldn't say more than that. I couldn't explain about the metal rod, about the deliberate cruelty, about the fact that I couldn't feel my toes anymore and was terrified that something was permanently damaged. His expression didn't change. There was no shock, no concern, just a tired annoyance that I had brought family matters into the open. He glanced at Eleanor, who was standing at the stove with her back to us, her shoulders tense. Then you must have deserved it, he said finally. Don't make your mother angry. And that was it. That was the extent of my father's concern for his youngest daughter. He picked up his newspaper, sat down at the table, and disappeared behind the sports section. Our conversation over, Eleanor turned from the stove and gave me a small, satisfied smile. She had won, and we both knew it. She had hurt me, and no one cared. She had beaten me badly enough that I could barely walk, and my own father had told me I deserved it. That was when I understood. Pain had no value in this house. It didn't make them change. It didn't make them ashamed. It didn't matter. I was screaming into a void, and the void was my family. I stopped trying to be seen after that. I became what they wanted. Invisible, except when they needed something. I did my chores with my head down, moving through the house like a ghost, speaking only when spoken to, asking for nothing, expecting nothing. I went to school and came home and disappeared into my room. My teachers noticed the limp, asked if I was okay. I told them I had fallen. A story I repeated so many times, it almost started to feel true. The school nurse looked at my leg when the bruising was finally visible beneath my jeans. Her face concerned. Evelyn, this looks serious. You should see a doctor. It's getting better. I lied. It wasn't. It was getting worse. The bruising had spread, deep purple and black and sickly yellow at the edges. My leg was stiff, hard to bend, and the pain had settled into a constant throb that never quite went away. But I couldn't see a doctor. Doctors asked questions. Doctors made reports. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that if anyone found out what Eleanor had done, she would make me pay for it in ways that would make the metal rod seem gentle. The limp became part of me, a constant reminder of the night I learned my place. Other students started calling me gimpy behind my back. Some of the crueler ones would imitate my walk in the hallways, laughing as I limped past. I pretended not to notice, kept my head down, made myself as small and unnoticeable as possible. But something else was growing in that silence. Something they couldn't see because they never really looked at me. Determination. I started planning my escape, not in some dramatic hike, run away in the middle of the night way. I was smarter than that. I knew I needed money, a place to go, a plan that would actually work. So I started saving. Every bit of money that came my way went into my escape fund. Birthday money from distant relatives who sent cards out of obligation. The few dollars Richard would occasionally leave on the counter for me to buy lunch at school. Change I found in the couch cushions when I was cleaning. It added up slowly. Painfully slowly. But it added up. 3 months after the incident, I found a job at a thrift store on the edge of town. The owner, Lydia Chen, was a small woman in her 60s with sharp eyes that saw more than most people. She hired me on the spot, even though I was only 16 and had no experience and could barely walk without limping. "You look like you need this," she said simply, and I nearly cried from the kindness in her voice. It was the first kind thing anyone had said to me in 3 months. The first time someone had looked at me and seen a person instead of a problem. I wanted to hug her, to thank her, to tell her that she had just thrown me a lifeline when I was drowning. But I didn't. I just nodded and said thank you, and tried not to let her see how much her small kindness meant. The work was hard. Standing for hours aggravated my leg, made it ache and throb and sometimes swell up again. But I didn't complain. I couldn't afford to complain. This job was my ticket out, and I wasn't going to risk losing it. I hid every dollar I earned in a hole I had torn in my pillow. It wasn't much. Minimum wage for part-time hours. But it was mine. Money that Eleanor didn't know about. Couldn't control. Couldn't take away from me. I would lie in bed at night, my hand on the pillow, feeling the reassuring bulk of bills hidden inside, and plan my future. Eleanor noticed the change in me. The way I moved with purpose even through the pain. The way I stopped asking for things or expecting anything. She noticed, and it made her suspicious. "What are you plotting?" she asked me one day, cornering me in the hallway as I was heading to my room. Her eyes were narrowed, searching my face for signs of rebellion. "Nothing," I replied, meeting her gaze for the first time in months. Just remembering. Her eyes flickered with something. Uncertainty, maybe. But she didn't push. She never did when she sensed I might fight back. Bullies are like that. They choose their moments carefully. Strike when you're weak. Retreat when you show strength. I saved for 8 months. 8 months of limping to work. Folding clothes. Organizing shelves. Learning that kindness existed outside the walls of the Reed family home. 8 months of hiding money in my pillow. Of planning and preparing and building up the courage to actually leave. Lydia taught me more than retail. She taught me that some people ask how you are and actually want to know the answer. She taught me that my pain was valid, even if my family refused to acknowledge it. She taught me, through her simple daily kindnesses, that I was worth something. One evening, I was closing up the shop when Lydia asked me about my leg. "Old injury," I said. "The lie automatic by now." "From your family," she said. It wasn't a question. I looked at her, startled, and something in my face must have confirmed it because she just nodded. She didn't push for details, didn't pry, didn't demand an explanation. She just reached into her pocket and handed me a set of keys. "There's a room in the back. Storage, but it has a cot and a sink, if you ever need it." I took those keys like they were made of gold, curling my fingers around them so tightly, the metal edges bit into my palm. "Why are you helping me?" She smiled, sad and knowing. "Because someone helped me once, when I needed it. And because you remind me of my daughter, before she died." I didn't know what to say to that. So I just held the keys and felt something warm unfurl in my chest. Something that might have been hope. 2 weeks later, I overheard Eleanor talking to Marlene in the living room. I was supposed to be upstairs, but I had come down for water and heard my name. I froze in the hallway, hidden by the shadows, and listened. "I can't wait until that thing leaves," Eleanor said, her voice carrying that particular tone of disgust she reserved for me. Not her daughter. That thing, like I was less than human, an object to be discarded. Marlene laughed, the sound bright and careless. "At least she's useful. Who else would do all the cleaning? You'd actually have to pay someone." They laughed together, and I stood in the hallway, perfectly still, perfectly silent, perfectly done. That was the moment. Not the beating, not the pain, not the months of being ignored and dismissed. That moment, standing in the dark hallway, listening to my mother and sister laugh about how they couldn't wait to get rid of me while simultaneously planning to use me for free labor. That was when something inside me finally, irrevocably broke. Or maybe it didn't break. Maybe it crystallized. hardened into something sharp and clear and absolutely certain. I was done. That night, I packed my few belongings into a backpack. I didn't take much because I didn't own much. A few changes of clothes, a photo of my grandmother, the only person in my family who had ever shown me genuine affection before she died when I was 10, my notebook full of scribbled plans and dreams, the money from my pillow. Everything good in that house belonged to Marlene, and I didn't want it anymore. I didn't want anything that connected me to them, anything that would make me remember this place once I was gone. But I did take one thing. I went to the hallway closet where Eleanor had returned the metal rod to its place among the garden tools. I held it in my hands, felt the weight of it. I remembered the sound it made against my bone. My hands shook, whether from fear or rage or something else entirely. I couldn't tell. Then I used all my strength to bend it. It took several tries, and my hands ached with the effort. The metal was strong, industrial grade, meant to support heavy rose bushes in high winds. But I was stronger, or maybe I was just more determined. I braced one end against the floor and pulled on the other end with all my weight. All my anger, all my pain channeled into this one action. The metal resisted, then gave way with a groan, bending into an ugly curve. I did it again, and again, until the one straight rod was twisted into a useless shape, warped beyond recognition. I was breathing hard when I finished, my hands cramping, my arms shaking. But the rod was ruined, useless, just like Eleanor had tried to make me. I walked back to Eleanor's room and slid the bent rod under her bed where she would eventually find it. A reminder, a promise kept, a message that said, "You tried to break me, but look what I did instead." Then I walked out of the Reed family home. Each step hurt. My leg would never quite work right again, but each step was also mine. Taken because I chose it, not because someone allowed it. I didn't look back. Not once. Not even when I heard Richard's voice from his study, calling my name. Not even when I passed Marlene's room and heard her laughing on the phone with one of her friends. I just kept walking, one painful step after another, until the house was behind me and I was standing on the sidewalk. Free. Lydia was waiting for me at the thrift shop. She had made up the cot in the storage room, added a small lamp, left a plate of food covered with foil. There was a note in her careful handwriting: "You don't have to explain. Just rest." I cried that night, but they were different tears than the ones I had cried on my bedroom floor months ago. These were cleaner somehow, like they were washing something away instead of drowning me. I cried until I was empty, until there was nothing left inside me but a strange sense of lightness. Like I had been carrying a weight I didn't even know was there until it was gone. Over the following months, I worked every shift Lydia would give me. I learned how to sort donations, how to price items, how to talk to customers without flinching when they looked at me. My leg still hurt, especially when it rained, but the pain felt different now. It wasn't a punishment anymore. It was evidence that I had survived. Lydia never asked about my family. She never pushed me to explain or share or open up. She just gave me space to exist, to heal at my own pace, to figure out who I was when I wasn't constantly being told who I should be. One day, about 6 months after I left, a man came into the shop asking for me. He was tall and official looking, wearing a badge that identified him as Detective Miller from the police department. My heart stopped. I thought Eleanor had sent him, that I was in trouble for running away, that I would be forced to go back. But that's not what he wanted. "Miss Reed, I'm investigating a complaint filed by your father regarding your mother's behavior. He claims she has been physically abusive and has also been embezzling money from her workplace. I need to ask you some questions." Richard had filed a complaint. Richard, who had told me I deserved to be hit, who had ignored my pain, who had chosen Eleanor over me every single time. He had filed a complaint. Later, I would learn that he hadn't done it for me. He had done it because Eleanor had started turning her cruelty on him, because he had found out about the embezzlement and wanted to protect himself legally, because he and Marlene had already planned to leave and wanted to make sure Eleanor couldn't come after them for money. But in that moment, standing in Lydia's thrift shop, I didn't know any of that. I just knew that someone was finally asking questions. I told Detective Miller everything. Not just about the metal rod, but about years of neglect and emotional abuse, About being called that thing and told I was a curse on the family. About the way Eleanor had always favored Marlene. About the way she used money and gifts as weapons, withholding them from me while showering Marlene with everything she wanted. He listened and took notes, and didn't interrupt. When I was done, he asked if I had any proof. I showed him my leg. The bruises had faded, but the shape of it had changed. The bone had healed wrong, leaving a visible dent in my shin where the metal rod had impacted over and over. The doctor Detective Miller took me to said it was consistent with repeated blunt force trauma. He took x-rays, documented everything, gave me copies for my records. 3 weeks later, Detective Miller came back to tell me that Eleanor had been arrested, not just for the abuse, but for embezzling over $200,000 from her employer over a 5-year period. They had found the bent metal rod under her bed, tested it, found my DNA in the old bloodstains that had soaked into the metal. They had financial records, email evidence, testimony from Richard and Marlene, who had both turned on Eleanor to save themselves. The case was solid. Eleanor was going to prison. When Detective Miller told me, I expected to feel something. Victory, maybe, or satisfaction. The vindication of finally being believed, finally being seen as the victim I had always been. Instead, I just felt tired. And then, surprisingly, at peace. You're free of her now, he said. I was already free. I replied. The trial happened without me. I submitted my statement, provided my medical records, but I didn't attend. I had spent enough of my life in Eleanor Reed's shadow. I wasn't going to spend one more day in a courtroom reliving what she had done. I had said my piece. I had told the truth. What happened next was up to the judge and jury. Eleanor was convicted on all counts. Child abuse, embezzlement, fraud. She was sentenced to 12 years in prison. Richard and Marlene received lesser sentences but still faced consequences. Richard got probation and community service for failing to report the abuse. Marlene was ordered to pay restitution for her role in helping Eleanor hide the stolen money. The house was sold to pay back Eleanor's employer and to cover legal fees. I didn't celebrate. I didn't feel the triumph I thought I would feel. I just felt done. Like a chapter had closed, and now I had to figure out what the next one would be. Lydia noticed me looking at the community center flyer on the store's bulletin board one day. About 3 months after the trial. They're looking for help, she said. Teaching, sewing, reading programs. That sort of thing. I don't know if I could teach anyone anything. I said. I was 18 now, legally an adult, but I felt about 100 years old. What did I have to teach except how to survive? She smiled at me. That gentle smile that had become so familiar. You don't have to teach. Sometimes just being there is enough. I applied the next day. The community center was in an old converted church, filled with the sound of children and the smell of paint and possibility. The director, Brenda Williams. He was a large woman with kind eyes who looked at my application and then looked at me, really looked at me, in a way that made me feel seen without feeling exposed. You're young, she observed. I'm 18. I said, why do you want to work with kids? I thought about that question for a long moment. I could have lied, given some polished answer about always loving children or wanting to give back to the community, but something about Brenda's direct gaze made me want to tell the truth, because I know what it feels like to be invisible, and I don't want any kid to feel that way. She hired me on the spot. My first day at the center. I was terrified. The children were loud and messy and completely unconcerned with my nervousness. They ran and shouted and laughed with the unself-conscious joy of kids who felt safe enough to be themselves. It was overwhelming and beautiful, and made my chest ache with something I couldn't quite name. A little girl, maybe 7 years old, grabbed my hand and pulled me toward the reading corner. Her hand was sticky with something, probably juice or candy, and her hair was coming loose from its braids. Miss, does it hurt when you walk? She asked with the brutal honesty of childhood. What do you mean? I asked, thrown by her directness. She pointed at my leg. You walk funny, like my grandma. She says it's her hero walk because she survived something big. I knelt down so I was eye level with her. Something in my chest cracked open. This little girl, this complete stranger, had just given me a gift she didn't even know she was giving. Yeah, it's kind of like that. She beamed at me. Cool. That means you're strong. I smiled. Really smiled. For the first time in years. Yeah, I guess I am. Her name was Sophie, and she became my shadow that day. She followed me around the center, chattering about her school and her friends and her grandma who walked with a cane. She didn't care about my limp. She didn't even seem to notice it after that first question. To her, I was just Miss Evelyn, the new helper who let her pick out books and didn't mind when she asked a million questions. The months turned into a year. I read stories to children. I helped with homework. I taught basic sewing, the skill I had learned from repairing my own worn clothes. I stayed late, came in early. That became someone the kids looked for when they arrived. I learned their names and their stories. Kevin, whose parents were going through a messy divorce. Emma, who was being raised by her grandmother because her mother was in rehab. Marcus, who stuttered when he was nervous, but sang beautifully when he thought no one was listening. Each of them carrying their own pain, their own struggles, their own need to be seen and heard and valued. And I saw them. I heard them. I valued them. Because I knew what it felt like to be invisible. And I refused to let any child in my care feel that way. Brenda pulled me aside one afternoon, about a year after I started. You're good at this, she said. Have you thought about school, social work? Maybe. I had not thought about school. School was something that happened to other people. People whose families supported them. People who had futures that extended beyond just surviving. I had barely graduated high school, spending my senior year working at Lydia's shop and trying to heal, both physically and emotionally. College seemed like a dream so distant it might as well have been on another planet. I don't know, I admitted. Think about it, she said. You have something these kids need. Someone who understands. I did think about it. I thought about it while I folded donated clothes at Lydia's shop. I thought about it while I lay on my cot at night, listening to the city outside. I thought about it every time a child smiled at me like I had given them something valuable just by existing. Maybe I could go to school. Maybe I could learn how to do this work properly. Professionally. Maybe I could turn my pain into something useful. Something that could help other people. Lydia, always practical, helped me research programs and financial aid. Brenda wrote me a letter of recommendation that made me cry because it described someone I barely recognized as myself. Someone capable and compassionate and strong. I applied to a community college with a social work program, expecting nothing, hoping for everything. I got in, with financial aid, with a future that suddenly seemed possible. I was 2 years into my program when Eleanor got out of prison on early release for good behavior. She had served 6 years of her 12-year sentence. I found out from a letter she sent to Lydia's shop. The only address she had for me. The letter was short. Just a few lines saying she was out. That she was living in a halfway house. That she wanted to talk. No apology. No admission of wrongdoing. Just a statement of facts and a request for contact. I threw the letter away. I didn't respond. I didn't go to see her. I had spent 6 years building a life without her. And I wasn't going to let her back in. Not even for a conversation. But she kept trying. More letters. A few attempted phone calls to the community center that Brenda kindly intercepted. And then, finally, she just showed up. I was closing up the center on a Tuesday evening when I saw her. Eleanor. Standing in the parking lot like a ghost from a life I had buried. She looked older. Smaller. Less solid somehow. Her coat hung wrong on her frame. And her hair had more gray than brown now. But it was still her. Still the woman who had taught me that family was just another word for pain. Evelyn, she said, taking a step forward. You've been hard to find. You didn't look, I replied. My voice steady. Not angry. Not bitter. Just stating a fact. She flinched at that, which surprised me. The Eleanor I remembered never flinched. Your father left. Marlene moved to Chicago. The house is sold. I'm alone now. I waited. I had learned patience in my time away. I had learned that silence was more powerful than words when used correctly. I came because I needed to say that maybe I shouldn't have done what I did that night. With the rod, I held up my hand. stopping her mid-sentence. Don't finish that sentence. You're only saying it to make yourself feel better. Her eyes widened. You hate me. I looked at her, really looked at her, and discovered something unexpected. I didn't hate her. Hatred required energy, and she had taken enough from me. Hatred meant she still mattered, still had power over my emotions, and I had worked too hard to get her out of my head to let her back in, even through something as consuming as hatred. I don't hate you, I said calmly. I just don't need you anymore. Her lip trembled. You sound like your father. Maybe, I said, but I'll never be like you. She took another step closer, her voice shifting to something that might have been pleading. Come home, please. It's not the same without you. I almost laughed. Home, you mean the place where you made me bleed for using lipstick? Her face crumpled. I was angry. I didn't mean to hurt you so badly. Yes, you did, I said. You always meant to. The difference is that now I remember without it destroying me. Eleanor covered her mouth with her hand. I sob escaping. That sound should have broken me. Once upon a time. It would have. Once upon a time. I would have done anything to make her stop crying. To make her happy. To earn the love she never had to give. But now it just sounded empty. Hollow. Like an echo from someone else's life. I picked up my bag and walked past her. She reached out instinctively. Maybe to grab me. Maybe to stop me? I stepped aside. The movement automatic after years of avoiding her hands. You'll remember this, I whispered, using her own words from that night years ago. Her eyes went wide. Not with anger, but with recognition. She understood, finally, after all this time. She understood what she had done. Or at least, she understood that I remembered. That I would always remember. That she couldn't rewrite history or pretend it had never happened. I left her standing there in the parking lot, alone in the silence she had once used against me. I expected to feel something. Closure. Maybe. Or victory. But I just felt tired and ready to go home. Not to the Reed house, which would never be home, but to the small apartment I had rented when I started college. The space that was mine, filled with things I had chosen. A life I had built with my own hands. That night, I lay in my bed and stared at the ceiling and thought about Eleanor standing in that parking lot. I wondered if she would try again. I wondered if she would keep pushing until I had to get a restraining order. I wondered if she would ever truly understand that what she had done wasn't just wrong. It was unforgivable. But mostly, I thought about Sophie and Kevin and Emma and Marcus and all the other kids at the center who needed me. I thought about my classes and my internship and the future I was building. I thought about Lydia and Brenda and all the people who had shown me that kindness existed in the world, and I realized that Eleanor didn't matter anymore. Not really. She was just a ghost, haunting a life I no longer lived. And ghosts only have power if you believe in them. I didn't see Eleanor again after that night. I heard, through the grapevine of small-town gossip, that she had moved to another state, that she had found work somewhere, that she had told people she had no children, that her family had abandoned her, that she was a victim of circumstances beyond her control. I didn't correct the record. I didn't care enough to try. Let her have her version of events. Let her be the victim in her own story. I had my truth, and that was enough. On a bright morning, 6 months after Eleanor's conviction, I walked into the community center, humming a song I had heard on the radio. The same little girl who had called my walk a hero's walk came running up to me. Miss Evelyn walks like a hero again, she shouted gleefully. This time, I didn't correct her. I just smiled and said, yeah, I guess I do. Because somewhere between the metal rod and the limp and the silence and the leaving, I had learned something Eleanor never understood. Strength isn't about never breaking. It's about deciding what to do after you're broken. It's about taking your scars and your pain and your story and using them to light the way for someone else. I still limp when I walk. My leg still aches when it rains. But I don't hide it anymore. I don't apologize for taking up space or for breathing too loud or for existing in a way that makes other people uncomfortable. I am Evelyn Reed, and I survived my family. More than that, I survived and chose to be kind anyway. I survived and chose to show up for children who needed someone to see them. I survived and chose not to pass on the poison that had been fed to me for 16 years. That is my revenge. Not her conviction. Not her punishment. Not her regret. My revenge is that I became everything she said I couldn't be. I became visible. I became valued. I became free. Sometimes people ask me if I would do it differently, if I could go back. If I would stay quiet. Be invisible. Avoid that night with the lipstick and the metal rod. And I tell them the truth. No. Because that night taught me that some people will hurt you even when you're trying your best to love them. And more importantly, it taught me that I could survive that hurt and still become someone worth knowing. So here's what I want you to understand. If you're in a situation where love feels like a weapon, where family feels like a cage, where trying to be enough never seems to work, no matter what you do, please know this. You are not the problem. You never were. And there is life waiting for you on the other side of leaving. It won't be easy. Your leg might hurt forever. You might limp for the rest of your life. But you'll be walking towards something instead of just limping away. And that makes all the difference. What about you? Have you ever had to leave someone who was supposed to love you? How did you find the strength to choose yourself? Drop your story in the comments below. Let's create a space where we can talk about the hard stuff. The real stuff. The survival stuff. And if this story resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe. Your support helps these stories reach people who need to hear them. Together, we can be each other's light in the darkness. Remember, you're not alone, and you're stronger than you think.